Hello, everyone, and welcome back. So we're going to do something a little bit different this week. We got a really great response to last week's podcast episode with Dr. Dory Weiss. And in that episode, I talked about the fact that kids and teens who struggle with depression also often experience anxiety. And what I've heard from parents and educators is that there's still a lot of anxiety about the uncertainty related to the COVID-19 pandemic, because even though kids have gone back to school, including my own children, there's a lot of instances where kids have been sent home unexpectedly because of an exposure or an outbreak in their cohort, or parents have been sent home because of an outbreak at work. So I wanted to re-release an episode that we did very early on in the podcast, episode 6. It's about managing family stress and anxiety with Dr. Stephanie Mihalas. I hope you'll enjoy this episode, and we'll be back with new episodes next week. Enjoy.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Welcome to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. I am so excited to introduce everyone to Dr. Stephanie Mihalas. Dr. Mihalas is a licensed psychologist and a nationally certified school psychologist. She's board certified by the American Board of Professional Psychology in the subspecialty of school psychology. Dr. Mihalas has a private practice in Los Angeles, the Center for Wellbeing, where she works on enhancing self-esteem, self-advocacy, and general well-being and happiness in children and families. In her practice, she utilizes a number of techniques, including cognitive behavioral therapy, play therapy, psychodynamic psychotherapy, art interventions, trauma-informed care, and mindfulness techniques. Dr. Mihalas and I share a passion for making an impact, and she is committed through her work to making a meaningful difference in the lives of others. I am absolutely thrilled to have her on the show today. Welcome, Dr. Mihalas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilson, for having me today. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here with you this morning.
I am so happy to have you here as well. This is such a challenging time for so many. And on top of that, we had an earthquake last night here in Southern California.
We did.
Just like a metaphor for 2020, I believe.
Yeah, we were, woken up, rattled, and I was like, we just had the passing of the justice. And I said, the heavens, and the earth was, sad and expressing its grief for the world.
Yes. You spoke about grief, and right now people are feeling so overwhelmed. It's been 6 months. People are feeling overwhelmed. They're irritable. They're anxious, stressed, sad, all of the emotions. And, there's a sense of grief over the loss of our regular lives. And I wonder if you can speak about what is normal to be experiencing during this time? When should people be concerned? Because there's just so much going on. And it feels like every time we feel like, okay, we're getting out of one situation, something else occurs that brings us back down.
Right. So I think that oftentimes people want to separate the concept of mental health and grief. And right now we really can't do that because we're in a state of individual grief and we're also in a state of collective grief. And so we really need to think about that we're being hit with one thing and then the next thing and then the next thing. And so when we're looking at this, we need to think about the concept that we're anxious and we're depressed and we're sad. And then we're also grieving the loss of the fact that our children can't be in school, that we're not seeing our family and friends, that we're not at work. And so all of these things are kind of intermingled and intertwined. And so that oftentimes we may feel okay one day, and then the next day we're not, and then next day we're okay. And that really is a normal response. And that, we're not clinically depressed if we're feeling up and down and back and forth. But then when it starts to become a clinical issue is that when we can't start to possibly feed ourselves, or we can't take care of our children, or we can't get our work done, or we're withdrawn, or we're realizing that it's becoming a progressive issue, or it's becoming something that, we really can't function anymore, or that we can't reach out to people. That's when we really, need to take a step back and realize that we maybe do need support from possibly a therapist or a clergy person or someone who can support us in the way that we need.
I love that you mentioned kind of going back and forth between emotions. And from what I'm hearing from a lot of families is that it's not only the day-to-day experiences that can change, they can experience that range of emotions in a given day, where they wake up feeling positive about the day. Okay, this is a challenging situation, but I can overcome it. And then over the course of the day, that changes.
Right. And that's completely normal in what we're going through, because oftentimes what happens is we may be fine, and then we turn on our social media or the news and we're struck with some information that can impact us heavily. So it's very natural that we can fluctuate hour to hour, and we can start grieving again or feeling some type of trauma response from our childhood or even our adulthood. And we have to have grace and compassion for ourselves. I think what's important in this era that we're living right now in 2020 is that we recognize that that's normative, and that we utilize our support, whoever that may be, so that if we feel like we're moving into a state of despair, that we can work through it with our support, rather than going into such a deep place that we may have a hard time getting out of.
I think that's such an important message, particularly for parents, because like us, our kids' lives have also been upended. We've got children who are suddenly at home all day. They're disconnected from their teachers, from their friends because of school closures. And, they're really struggling with this distance learning that many parents will say has gone on for too long, was a disaster in the spring. I think they're doing things a little better in the fall, but it's still a struggle for kids. And, the American Psychological Association has been doing the stress survey. And I think over 70% of parents report experiencing stress related to distance learning, and it's very hard to parent when you yourself are feeling stressed and anxious. Could you speak a little bit to how parents are the best way for parents to support their children who are experiencing stress and anxiety when they themselves are experiencing similar feelings?
Right. Parents are so stressed right now. I mean, beyond stressed. And, one of the things that I hear the most is that it's the first time they're seeing their children learn. And they are so frustrated. And they're like, I have never seen my kid so dysregulated, or I've never seen my kid so inattentive. Does my child have a learning challenge? Does my child have an emotional problem? I mean, and they're completely losing their mind. And that's one of the things that's creating the distress for the parent, in addition to the fact that the parent is trying to work and they're trying to manage their child to make sure they're focusing during Zoom learning. And so it's this circular dynamic. And then on top of it, they're creating more stress for their child because they're mandating that they learn a certain way that may in fact not be congruent with the child's learning on top of it. And so they're forcing their child into this bubble that their child has never wanted to learn that way, because at school they likely were learning a different way. And so parents are actually creating even more stress for themselves. They're creating more stress for their child, and it's this compounded reaction. And so what I have been recommending to parents is really taking a step back and seeing if during Zoom learning, if they are sitting next to their child, having a conversation with their child, like, do you actually need me there? Am I creating more stress for you? Is this how you learned when you were at school, or did you learn a different way? How can I support you? I really recommend parents, if they feel like they have to sit there every hour, taking a 15-minute break and leaving, because it is way too stressful to keep sitting there, because they are creating an anxiety reaction for themselves. I think parents also need to have a self-care time every day, because now they're having, double, triple job. They're, cleaning the house. They are doing their primary work. They are now doing a secondary work of becoming, teacher and monitor and supervisor of recess and lunch and everything else. And so if there's no self-care time, parents are talking about burnout. They're also not having time for their partner if there is a partner at home. So they also need to have a carve out time on the daily, even if it's 10 minutes, to decompress with their partner. And, there are a lot of marriage difficulties now that people are discussing, because there's arguments over, should we remove our child from school? Should we change our child's learning environment? And so all of these things are coming up. And without having the adequate time for self-care and for partnering, things are starting to really fall apart in the home environment.
Really, what you're describing is this bi-directional relationship between family members, particularly when you're talking about the impact of the stress on a marriage, on the partnership, and in co-parenting under times of severe stress, and what that looks like and the challenges that are involved in trying to do that. And then it's so multi-layered, because again, you're watching your child struggle. You want to be there to support them, but you being there to support them may also create increased anxiety for them with you being there. So I like the idea of taking that 15-minute break, coming back, asking your child what it is that they need. Do they need you there? Because sometimes even if a parent is not saying anything, the fact that they're there, the nonverbal cues can create anxiety for that child.
Right. I mean, I have a preschooler, and we put her in online learning just for circle time. And what we have noticed is when we are out of the room, she does so much better. And my husband and I had the discussion of what we should do about this. And I originally thought having myself in the room would help support her. And by having that partner discussion, we decided that having her out was better. But without having that partner time, we wouldn't have come to that resolution. And so that's why I think it's just incredibly important to really have that adult time to make those, executive decisions without the stress involved.
It's so important. And, we've been talking about anxiety and about stress. I think trauma has been introduced into the conversation. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between anxiety and trauma? Are we experiencing a traumatic event and what that means?
There is debate right now of whether it's trauma or not. And I think it depends, frankly, on the makeup of the child, the adult, and the family, and what people's genetics, epigenetics, and their makeup, and what their possibly family history, what their cultural background, what their religious, ethnic background, and what's happened in their previous history has been. And so for some families, this is absolutely a trauma, because they have basically been exposed historically to various things. And so basically they are being re-traumatized over and over and over again to oppressive situations. And so they are fearing for what is going to continually happen. And they're having to have discussions within their families, either prematurely or frankly at the right time, about exposures to situations within their family units, preparing their children or their adolescents or their adult children to situations and discussions that need to happen within their family units. For some families, this is just anxiety about what is going on, be it the pandemic, be it health issues, be it financial situations. And within those families, they're just having an anxious response, which is possibly normative for them. And people can also have both anxiety and PTSD responses as well. And so there are a lot of people right now in the community who have had historical racial injustices and oppressions, people who have been marginalized because of learning issues, chronic health issues, who are both experiencing anxiety as well as PTSD responses because, frankly, they don't know what's going to happen with school. They don't know what's going to happen with the elections, and they don't know what's going to happen related to the police situations as well as court rulings moving forward.
And what you've described is just this blanket of uncertainty in a number of different areas. And it is my experience and what I've seen from a lot of families, from a lot of individuals, is that when there's uncertainty, it contributes to the anxiety because our brains want to know what's going to happen. And in this situation, in all of the areas that you described, we don't have an answer in terms of when is this going to end? How is this going to end? What is this going to mean for me? You know, you've got parents who want to do right by their children, who want to support them. And all kids are struggling, but those kids who have learning challenges, mental health challenges, social difficulties, they're struggling even more. And so if you're a parent who has watched your child struggle, and you may have even watched your child demonstrate improvements in a number of different areas, and now you're watching the regression and the loss of skills learned. And that can feel devastating to a parent to watch that and to feel helpless. And I think when we think about depression and anxiety, that feeling of helplessness and hopelessness, we know contributes to those emotions that people feel because they feel like they don't have any control over the situation.
And I think that's the critical factor here that kind of compounds the anxiety, because it's not only the anxiety that the child feels, but it's the anxiety that the parent feels. And so then it becomes the collective family anxiety. And the parent can't tell the child that it's going to be okay because that's an inauthentic anxiety, because the parent doesn't know that. The parent doesn't know that this is going to be okay because none of us actually really know that. And children are very attuned to their parents. And parents are very scared right now. That is an actual fact. Like, they don't know when schools are going to start. If children are in the public school, they don't know really when the 504 or the IEP is going to be implemented again. Parents don't know whether their child is going to be able to make the gains back that they actually had. We don't know whether the vaccine is going to work. We don't know really anything here. We don't know what's going to, a lot of children are talking about the election. A lot of children are talking about race relations and civil unrest, and they are scared. Children are much more politically involved, and they are wanting to be part of the activist movement, and they are concerned. And parents cannot actually give them factual information. And so this, in fact, contributes to anxious responding. And then leading back to your original question about PTSD, children are seeing stuff on social media related to the deaths and the tragedies of various people that have passed this year. And so they keep seeing this over and over again. That is a PTSD response that moves beyond anxiety because they can't get the visions out of their head. That's where we have both the anxiety and the PTSD confounded.
It seems that for someone who may have a predisposition to anxiety, that this pandemic, this societal unrest, this period of uncertainty may be the tipping point for them in terms of an uptick in the symptoms that they're experiencing and also the need for help, professional help.
Yeah, I would say so. And I think this is where I am really encouraging parents to be on point, because there are a lot of parents, I think, that understandably so, just kind of like wait and watch their children's mental health because they don't want to just throw them into therapy or, get psychiatric services for them, because children are developmental beings. They wax and wane with anxiety or depression because there are developmental stages where children, see monsters or they get scared of certain things and they go through that developmental stage. And people will call my office and I will say, no, watch it for a month. Don't put your kid in therapy. And I appreciate that part of children's mental health. But this is where I actually am asking parents to acutely watch what's happening. Because like you said, Dr. Wilson, this is the tipping point where children who have that temperament to be on the anxious or the dysthymic side, they really actually do need support. There's way too much going on that put them over the tipping point. And this is the time really where children do need the extra therapeutic support where they would really glean benefit. And it doesn't mean that they'd necessarily stay in therapy for the rest of their lives, but getting that, additive support right now may actually give them what they need so that they actually don't end up acquiring PTSD, for example, and don't end up having trauma with a capital T. And then in the long run, as adults, aren't suffering needlessly.
And I'm thinking about kids who are struggling with learning and what we know about stress and anxiety and PTSD, like you've described, it can interfere with the learning process. So again, we're talking about compounding difficulties that a child might be experiencing. So it seems that if you address the anxiety and the stress through psychotherapy, through techniques that parents can utilize at home, that you not only help them from an emotional standpoint, but you also help the learning process, particularly those kids who are at risk because of already identified learning differences and learning difficulties.
Yeah, so a lot of children right now are being flooded with so many different things. And to your point, they are struggling with learning. So they are being bombarded with, again, images of various things, or they're obsessing about the virus, or they're being, concerned about, well, when am I going back to school? And they're ruminating on it. And so they're just completely obsessed with so many different things. Or it may not be on the topics of the day, but children tend to ruminate or be concerned about other things because that's how children's mental health works. So they may end up acquiring a food phobia, or they may show it through their sleep or their eating habits, or it may come out as bedwetting even in adolescence, or they may start crying or fighting with their sibling or just have regressive tendencies. And so parents should be attuned to all these different things, or they may start like fidgeting and they never used to do that. Or they may start saying like, I just don't want to go to school. I hate school. And they used to love it. All these different things that impede the learning process when it wasn't there. And again, those are kind of the times where as a parent, you should say, my kid probably needs support. They're not able to learn anymore. And again, learning also is about social emotional well-being too. And so if children are not wanting to connect with their friends anymore, if they used to really love to talk to their teachers and now during teacher connection time via Zoom, they're disinterested, those are also times to be aware that something's gone awry. Because again, academics is not the only thing about learning in, quotes, but emotional learning. That's also part of the academic milieu.
Yes. And I love that you mentioned that social emotional learning, because oftentimes, well, more recently, there's been an increase in concern about the academics and the summer slide and the COVID slide. But again, students are missing out on those social interactions, and learning takes place in a social context. I often say that because, you get your cues from your peers. They enjoy collaborating with their friends and going up to the front of the room and talking with their teacher and showing what it is that they've done. And they're losing those opportunities. And Zoom is just not a good medium for real connections. It's not a good substitute, right? And the kids know that. I've had my own son say, when we've asked, do you want to have a Zoom play date? He says, I miss my friends, but I don't want to see them like that. Right? Which is, his interpretation of Zoom. He doesn't like it. I don't want to see them like that. And I understand that because it's not how a lot of kids enjoy interacting with their peers. It's unnatural, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think kids are just getting so burnt out because the months have kind of gone on and on where they're not able to connect. And I think the onus is on us as adults to figure out ways to have meaningful connections. And so how do we do that safely depending on our comfort zones and the needs of our families based on health risks and the risks of others to make sure that social emotional learning continues and the connections continues for our children so their mental health is not impacted. So does that mean we have socially distanced gatherings if that's safe? And does that mean it's 6 feet or does that mean it's 12 feet? And does that mean that it's with masks or does that mean it's not with masks? Does that mean we still encourage Zoom calls or phone calls? Does that mean we have bike rides? Does that mean we still just go out as a family and make sure we're just seeing other people, outside for walks? Does that mean we take car rides if we're a very high risk family just to get out and see the water or the mountains, depending on where we live, or the lakes, just to notice like the natural beauty of the world and name things that we see and make a game out of it? Does that mean that we get online and connect with like the local zoos in our areas and see the animals, again, to just make sure we're facilitating connection with nature? And again, that's not necessarily with humans, but it's a type of social learning because we're seeing animals at least. And we're able to kind of have empathy for something else that is not us. Are we engaging in online protests, for example, if we're not as a family comfortable going to protests in person because it's not safe? That's another example of a social emotional learning. So again, it's really starting to think out of the box as families on how we can have connection with other. And what does other mean?
It sounds like in addition to creating this social and emotional learning experience, what you've described are also really good strategies for managing stress and anxiety. Having the bike ride and being in the car and going for a walk. All of those things are good for our emotional health and our overall well-being.
Right. That's exactly correct. And it's a way to connect as a family unit that is not in the home, hopefully, if possible, because in the home, I think a lot of homes are really full of stress and anxiety, and they've become the academic environment and the work environment. So it's a way to kind of have separation from that. And it's a way to kind of rebond in the family unit in a different way.
That is such an important point, Stephanie, because the home used to be that place of of solace, that safe place where you would go at the end of a school day, a work day, where you could just relax. And now it is now serving a multi-purpose. Home is now work. Home is now school. And it's no longer solely that place where you can go to unwind. So I love the idea of leaving the home to unwind.
Right. And if a family can't do that, because some families can't, and I don't want to be ableist in saying that they can, some of the things that I'm also recommending is having some symbolism then. So taking a sheet and covering up the table that is now your work table or your school table. Having a ritual, which may be like having a drum, or if you don't have a drum, taking a plate and a knife and going ding, ding, ding when the work day and the school day is over. So creating some type of ritual or symbolism that connotes the day is over and we are switching into our family. And if you don't have a family, a personal time that you can now decompress and become ritualistic in that.
Yes, it's really about separating the work and school time from the family time, the playtime, the self-care time.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things that I'm hearing is that on one hand, we can see the anxieties and the stresses as normalized in this situation that we find ourselves in. But there are definitely strategies that we can use to manage the stress and anxiety. There are also things that we can look for that indicate that we may need some extra support and some extra help, particularly not only in ourselves, but also in our children, and making sure that they have the support that they need to really promote their well-being and their emotional health in addition to their physical health. And I would love for you to tell listeners how they can get in touch with you, because I just appreciate you sharing your insight and your expertise with listeners. And, if they have questions or they're seeking a consultation or support for their family, what is the best way for people to connect with you, Dr. Mihalas?
Sure. So you're welcome to go to my website, which is www.askdr Stephanie, STEPHANIE.com. And that's how you can reach me, as well as finding me on Twitter, which is Ask Dr. Stephanie. And you can find me there as well.
Great. Dr. Mihalas, thank you so much for this informative conversation and for all that you do and continue to do to support so many children and so many families. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I wish you and all the families listening well.
I am so thrilled that Dr. Mihalas was able to share her expertise with you. She is such an exceptional clinician and a wonderful collaborator in the Child Nexus professional community. I hope you will let me know what your biggest takeaway was from this episode. DM me on Instagram at Child Nexus Community and let me know. In the meantime, be well, stay healthy, and I look forward to chatting with you soon.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.